Thank you very much, Sharon, for organising that. I'd like to just say up front, many thanks to our partners in the three-part series of No Time to Waste. Griffith University and Sharon have been fantastic in working with us. Sharon is the founding director of social marketing at the Griffith Group. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to her there, because she and I were on the panel of the first one that we ran. And we were talking about behavioural change, just to give you some context. This one is very much about the waste management, human health, and obviously science and technology. So we've obviously moved the second series to a different level. And then the third one, I'll talk of the third part of this three series, I'll talk about later on. As you know, we have a cracking pace. We've got three amazing speakers from overseas, and we've got people from all over Australia, which is amazing, and around the world. Their presentations are going to be split into the three sections of what they're talking about. I kind of feel like I should say that they're the three musketeers, because we've got a scientist, we've got a professor, and we've got an inventor. So I think we've got a really good mix here for everybody to enjoy and learn from, and obviously to contribute to. So thank you so much for all joining us today. We're really pleased that you're with us. I thought, even though that you've seen the little bios of each of the speakers, I wanted to just give you a little précis before each of the speakers start. So I will go into that very quickly. First person that is going to be speaking for us today is Dr. Jeff Brighty. And Jeff, as you know, is a published research scientist, a PhD in fish reproduction and aquaculture. His career is amazing. He not only works at Plastic Oceans UK, which is obviously part of our Global Alliance with Plastic Oceans Foundation, he also has his own consultancy sustainability business. He studies in that area as well, with flooding, water quality, and climate change adaptation. And when he can, I know that he gets out on his kayak to view things firsthand on the water without creating any carbon emissions. So good on you, Jeff, for following true to what you do. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Jeff to be speaking to you about ocean plastics in relation to marine and human health, the problem.
Morning, Ricky from England, and thanks very much for the lovely warm introduction. I'm not sure that kayak is completely carbon neutral, because we do consume a fair amount of food and drink as we go about the local roads. Yes, I'm very lucky to live very close to a national park here in the UK, so it's just joyous to be out and about, particularly as lockdown is slowly released. Sharon, if I can have the slides, that'd be great. Thank you. So I'm going to just pick up on just kind of set the scene for the session, in particular for our two speakers that follow on from me, really about talking about what the problem is. And for me, there's having been involved with Plastic Oceans formally since 2014, you know, sort of monitored this, and not much shocks me now in this issue. But in all honesty, COVID has made me really rethink, you know, well, exactly what is it that we get from plastic that we need to retain, and how do we sort of use that to think, well, actually, we do begin to value this material rather than just throw it away into our recycling bins, and do something called wish cycling, which means that you put it away and then somebody magically at the other end is going to take that back into something that's still useful, and not burn it or put it into a landfill. So although the slide doesn't quite scan, I guess the first question here, shall we go back a slide, please, Sharon? The question I've tried to pose for us is, you know, kind of what's the greatest problem that we need to look at and to solve to stop plastic pollution? I know Sharon's done the first poll, and the sort of the first photograph really is that sort of value proposition. What is it we get from plastic? There's an embarrassing first world problem where we are so profligate with our resources, in particular food, and you know, certainly in the UK, food waste has been a significant waste management problem. not just from the energy and resources that go into grow food in the first place to get it to the shelves, but then obviously we then use it and don't necessarily use it as quickly as we should do and throw it away. And plastic has certainly given us a lot of value to protect food, to give it a longer shelf life. In the UK, we now cover cucumbers with plastic, although that was actually a barrier to for human health reasons, because there was an infectious disease that was in Europe in the mid 2010s, and they put plastic on it so that it protected the consumer from eating a salad good, as it were, from picking up basically dysentery or gastric flu. And so there was a concern, the was a solution that plastic was being brought forward, but of course that plastic was then thrown away and is essentially a single use and goes straight into residual waste. So, and strangely, in the beginnings of the lockdown, I know everybody went mad for buying toilet rolls, but which obviously have a long shelf life, but actually, food waste in the UK rocketed in the first couple of weeks of lockdown. Everyone went and bought loads of food, and of course it all went off, even despite the packaging. But then there's the question really as well, do we have too much packaging? And I love the Heinz baked beans multi-pack, because on the multi-pack it says, not recyclable at home, but hey, take it back to your store and they will recycle it for you. So which begs the question, why am I having to do that? Do we need to have that wrap around that those 6 tins of beans? And why not use cardboard? Why not something that's readily recyclable? So if you want the utility of having a 6-pack because it's easier to handle and so on. So do we have too much? Has this gone too far? And actually a lot of that really is about marketing. If you look at one there, that's really about selling the product, but not really, and actually selling more of the product. Because we know once this material gets out into the wider environment, it's impossible to get it back. It washes up on our shores and breaks up. It doesn't break down, it's breaking up and fragmenting. And that sieve, which is from the center of the Pacific, just demonstrates that plastics have been out in the ocean for some years. So although we're going to see the problem now, some of this material has been out there for tens of years and is slowly proliferating into smaller and smaller plastic and getting into our food chain. There's plenty of science on that. And Plastic Oceans UK did a science review following the film of Plastic Ocean, and we're doing a new science review, and Ricky will be sharing that with you as our Australasian partner, so no doubt you'll be able to share that with your community over in Australasia. So there's the point. So value proposition, yes. Has it gone too far? Probably. Oh my word, there's an impact when it gets out. So if you go to the next slide, please, Sharon, just to run through, just to give you some points to think about here. This was described by the producer of the film Plastic Ocean, Joe Ruxon, who's a very close friend of Ricky's and mine, about a vision of the future. This is Tuvalu, which will be known to many of you in Australasia. This is a place where there were no real consumer goods being sent there until literally the 1970s. And then this material started to accumulate because they have no waste management facilities. So this is the vision of, yes, we have waste management facilities in developed countries, but actually in developing countries, they are not there. The waste collection is not there. The waste processing is not there. And Tuvalu was completely absent. And by the 1990s, it really began to overwhelm the island such that they were just dumping it. You can imagine how beautiful that beach must be if it didn't have plastic and other material, other debris covered over it. So Joe said, this is a vision of hell. And this could happen here, and it is happening here. We're seeing it in our hedgerows and on our roadsides. We're seeing it on our beaches. It's not just places like Tuvalu or other countries in Asia, for example, Indonesia, where I recommend that everybody has a look at the story of plastic, because it really does take the story on from our film, A Plastic Ocean, to tell really what's been going on in commercial world to create this problem. So if you go from that picture to the next slide, please, Sharon, as our sort of vision of the future. This is Henderson Island. A good friend of mine, James Beard, was on an expedition to Henderson Island, which is in the Pitcairn group. This is uninhabited. This island has no people there consuming plastic waste, consuming fast-moving consumer goods, and yet this beach is littered with plastic debris. A lot of it is marine fishing gear. They attributed it some to ocean-going trawlers from places like New Zealand and wider Asia, but also there are fast-moving consumer goods debris there as well. There's cups, there's bottles, there's bits of plastic debris just from food packaging. So the question is kind of, where's this waste coming from? And it is coming from those two sources. It is coming from fisheries, and so we know that ghost nets are out there. These are nets that either cut adrift for illegal fishing, or they just, the lines break, or they get snagged, and the fishermen, have no choice really to save their ship. They have to cut the line. So the fishing gear gets lost overboard, floats around, begins to proliferate. You've got ropes in those photographs, floats and so on. But it just ends up being floating around and eventually being washed ashore, where I assume it's not causing much harm, although we know hermit crabs on those beaches have been using the pots as shells. And of course, the challenge there is that hermit crabs can smell each other. And if the hermit crab goes into something like a pot, other hermit crabs will follow. And if they die, they will all lead to their death. So these things become little death traps on the beaches. Next slide, please. So we are beginning to see, even those materials as being washed up on the shore, there are impacts. And certainly James showed that there was no doubt about it that the turtles that were hatching on those beaches were encountering plastic from the moment they hatched. And there's a challenge there as well. Well, what's that material to them? Are they looking to eat it? Certainly we know ocean-going life does eat plastic. We've seen plenty of examples of that. But I love that toy soldier, and the toy soldier story that we found in a Plastic Ocean was that this was found. We had a toy soldier that was found inside a Lazy and albatross, and the question is, well, whose soldier was it? How did it get lost to the environment? Must have been a child playing on the beach and then got washed away. So how is it that we are so profligate with this material? So the next piece I really want to pick up really is about our behaviour. The next slide, Sharon. These will go quite quickly. I photographed this on the tube in London earlier this year, and I hadn't appreciated really how telling this photograph might be, because Costa, a major coffee chain, I've said, we're going to collect all the cups and we're going to be able to recycle all those. And that does depend on us. We consume this material and then we just throw it away. And if we choose not to take it back to a Costa or put it in a recycling bin, it becomes litter, and then essentially it's lost to the system. So this was the vision of the sort of London that I was seeing in earlier this year, and then pre-COVID-19. And then the next slide, please, Sharon. It began to morph into something like this. A lot of those gloves that you're seeing on the ground would have been from people who were doing deliveries. I'm sure people are getting home deliveries, and you'll see people having gloves, particularly the online retail shops, as it were, that are still selling at this time, because our shops are shut here. So a proliferation of these gloves, and of course people are pushing the gloves and the PPE down their toilets, and there's been messages from water companies, please, saying don't put these things down the toilet. They'll block your sewer system and cause major problems in pumping stations. But of course this stuff will end up going into wastewater treatment works or into surface water drains, as you've seen there, and getting out into the wider environment. So we've switched from the on-the-go convenient food, and we're now looking at a whole new raft of marine pollution. And the next slide really, I think, said it all for me. This is Gary Stokes from a charity in Hong Kong called Ocean Asia. Sharon, if you can go to the next slide. And you may have seen this now in waterways, inland, but also on the coast. And Gary was collecting this material off the island around Hong Kong. Literally hundreds of face masks and gloves that have been thrown away and allowed to pollute our environment. So we know that this material, we value it. We are seeing great usage of PPE through the COVID crisis, and everybody can understand why that's most important. But actually, this stuff is just escaping the environment, and it's down to our behaviour. So you think, how is that changing? How is that going to change as we come out of lockdown? And the last slide I have really suggests to me as though we're not out of this. This is a photograph that was taken about a week ago as people began to break out and go to the coast for the first time. David Jones, who runs Just One Ocean, a charity in the UK, and is doing something called the Big Microplastic Survey, and I recommend you look at his website as well, demonstrates quite clearly that we're going back to our old behaviours. We haven't changed. So we've gone from, and we're back now to...
Why did you say that?
I'm sorry? Sorry, someone asked me a question. So my last slide here really focuses on kind of the hope from the despair. If we can possibly move now from really seeing the impact, the real value of plastic in our lives is giving us longer shelf life of food. We're not going shopping as often as we used to. So we're not going shopping daily. We're going shopping almost weekly now. We've gone back to how we shopped 15, 20 years ago. We value the PPE that people are using in the care system, and now we're having to wear PPE going out and about. But it's pretty clear that people are still throwing this material away. And it's the question then becomes, that's just creating other problems, getting health problems for people to go and collect it and deal with it. And that's pretty shameful. How dare we give someone else the problem of dealing with our waste in general, but now particularly we've got this COVID epidemic, it's even more pointed, I think. But then it's how do we get the value back from that material once we've used it? How do we manage the system to enable that to happen? Because suddenly we've got this explosion of PPE in the domestic world that we didn't have before. This material is going down the domestic waste stream and not just going into hazardous waste streams around hospitals and care homes. So we have a different challenge. And I think there's a question we were discussing as a panel before we came on about how much plastic is now in use. Is it less or is it more? Certainly from the UK, I think the feeling is we're using a lot more single-use plastic because we see the value in that. We want to buy stuff that is protected, is clean, can be disinfected when you get it home. But the question then becomes, well, what do we do with it? Is this going to accelerate our use of plastic? And is it therefore going to accelerate ocean pollution? My final word, Sharon and Ricky, really is that we really are facing another dilemma here. We have to find, and I hope that Sunil and Len will sort of talk to some of these points, is we have to find a way in which we get the value, but we get the value back. And we have to find a way to avoid the costliness of environmental pollution from plastics because it persists, proliferates, and it pollutes and gets into our food chain. But we also then need to make sure that this material is somehow either reused, we are reusing PPE certainly, but also how we can recycle when it comes to end of life and get it back into a higher value usage and not just go into low value, low grade recycling. And so I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. There's been a bit of chatter in the box while you were speaking, and some people have rightly pointed out that we've had PPE products like washing up on shore after a container lost its load. So it's a very Australian issue at present, and people are definitely dealing with that. So another participant sort of mentioned that the photos really do demonstrate this is a consumer issue. So as you're participating in the poll, you can very much see what we're all sort of thinking. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I just wanted to add to what you were saying as well, Jeff, in that one of the reasons why I created this No Time to Waste series is because I really, really wanted to get people to get back on board and think about what's going on out there, because confusion definitely has clouded all the work that's been done over the last 3 years in particular about the responsibility and behaviour change with single-use plastic. And, you know, I think people are now becoming a bit complacent. And I was just reading an article recently from the World Economic Forum, and they said that a study that was done earlier this month said that the virus can live up to 24 hours on paper, cardboard and fabrics, compared to 72 hours on plastics and other hard, shiny surfaces, which just goes to show that, you know, we've got this messaging going out that people now don't know, or they're confused and they think that plastic is better, but actually it's not when you look at these statistics. So I think there needs to be some really clear messaging that comes out worldwide about the actual what's going on and how long the virus lasts on particular surfaces, etc. So and the other thing that was really disturbing was that in various countries around the world, they're thinking that, you know, well, we can go back to our old ways and just keep using single-use plastic. So in countries like the US, California is one of many states that has lifted its ban on single-use plastic bags, and New York and New Jersey, and even the UK, where you're from, have postponed their ban that was set ready to go to stop, to ban plastic bags. So I think there's an assumption, there's a confusion, there's this grey zone out there, and I think it's something that is very important that we get onto, and that was one of the reasons with this series.
Jeff, there's one question or point that's come in that I'd like to actually raise for you, and the question was raised: hasn't the oil price collapsed destroyed the opportunity for recycling? So I don't know if you've got a comment that you'd like to make on that one.
So what I'd like to say is that's from Craig. Craig, thank you for your comment. That is going to be covered for you when Len speaks, our third speaker. He's going to be all over that, and he'll tell you all about that and answer that question for you. Really good question. So I would like to keep moving.
One question, just make one point. I didn't make it, but I just want to say, I think we all owe a great debt of gratitude to people who are working in the waste industry right now.
Yeah.
Because they're putting themselves, we talk about medical people and care workers and all the people in, the key workers, but the key workers keeping our municipal waste systems working, I think deserve a vote of thanks as well, because they're dealing with stuff that we don't want. We're happy to see it go away. And of course, that's now become, hazardous, in a domestic way that it probably wouldn't have been before. So I just want to make that. So if anybody here is from the waste management sector, my personal thanks to you, because I think you're doing a great public service, and you need to be safe as well. So I hope that the precautions that your companies and councils are giving to you are adequate to deal with the risk that you might now be facing. So thank you and well done. Yeah.
I herald, mirror what Jeff has said, of course. I'm sure a lot of us do. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to our next speaker. So as I said, most of you have already read his bio. So I'm talking about Professor Sunil Herat. He's the Program Director of Master of Environmental Engineering and Pollution Control at Griffith University. I actually met Sunil through an Indonesian delegation that came over to Australia September of last year, and they came and actually visited Plastic Oceans, and we spoke to their group, and it was really fantastic to speak with him and meet the team. He is, manages and runs several professional training programs in resource management and integrated waste. He's a member of the United Nations Regional 3R Forum for Asia and the Pacific. He wears many hats, and he also is an expert in all of these hats in circular economy and sustainable consumption and production, which is how I learned that he actually has a big love for chili, and he loves chilies, and he loves all that you can do with them, and wants to make sure that there's no waste with chili and you minimise any waste on anything that you're using. So on that note, and maybe you've got some good recipes there for us, Sunil, as well, I'd like to hand over to you, and he's going to be speaking to us specifically about waste plastic and the UN focus in Asia Pacific and the challenges in developing and emerging economies in the Asia Pacific region, particularly with the pandemic and medical waste issue. So over to you, Sunil. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. Good evening and good afternoon, everyone. Just want to thank the Plastic Oceans Australia for inviting me, especially Ricky and Sharon. They are giving me the honor of making a presentation. I don't have any slides prepared for this presentation, but I'll just keep talking, and please feel free to ask any questions at any stage. So basically, I'll be talking about the Asia Pacific region, and Jeff made an excellent presentation on the impact of plastic in various countries. So my focus will be in the Asia Pacific region and looking at the current scenario. So to get things started, I just want to talk a little bit about waste management, because this is a topic which is not very popular with the decision makers, because this is where you don't get a lot of funding. And also from a public point of view, this is our nature. I mean, no one to be blamed for this, because we are willing to pay for what is coming into our mouth, but we don't want to pay for what is going from behind, because what is coming behind is a government problem. So we are willing to pay for water, electricity, and those things, but we are not willing to pay for the other side of things. So this is the drama we have in waste management. So all these activities, someone needs to pay for these activities. So waste management is not a free service. We need to, it has costs. So we need to equate that to very similar to water, electricity, and so on. So that's one point. The other point is that the UN studies have shown that the cost of inaction is about 5 times more than the cost of action in this space. What that means is that if we just ignore the problem now because there's no funding to sort out, 5 years down the track, we'll have to spend 5 to 10 times more to deal with the issue. So this is it's a very important issue when you talk about plastic waste, because we cannot ignore and do business as usual scenarios. So looking at Asia Pacific region, as you all know, out of the 10 top, if you rank the countries in the world related to plastic waste pollution, especially related to the ocean impact, out of the 10 countries, you will see that 8 of them are in the Asia Pacific region. So this is a major problem for us, because you see countries like India, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and so on. There's a heavy use of single-use plastics, and basically there's no organizational structure to deal with the issue. So the question we have to ask is that why the plastics are leaking into the ocean? This is a major question. So in the past, you see, if you look at marine pollution, we are talking about plastics coming from ships. This was many years ago. But however, now the findings are that 80% or even more of the plastics are coming from the inland activities and not from the ships, which means that we are somehow leaking these plastics into the rivers, and then the rivers, of course, take those plastics into the ocean. So the solution, therefore, is to see how we can stop this leakage. And when you think about the solution, we need to think about why it is difficult to have a solution. And there are two main reasons for this. The first reason is, especially if you look at the Asia Pacific region, I think Jeff rightly mentioned this as well, there's not, the waste management facilities are not there. And in particularly, the separation of waste at the source is not happening. So everything, municipal solid waste, medical waste, and everything you can think of get into one group, and then end up in landfills, or in most cases open dumps. So there is no if you look at the Asia Pacific region, in many countries there's no mechanism for the public to dispose the plastics. So that is one area. The other area is, of course, getting into the production side, because if you look at the plastics, they are not pure. As you know, the plastics are made out of fossil fuel, but during the manufacturing process, the manufacturers need to add some chemicals. We call it chemical additives, because it has to serve a function. So this addition of chemicals will impact on the recycling efforts. So that is why it's very difficult to recycle certain plastics, very difficult to recycle. So therefore, we need to look at how to solve these two areas. And if you look at the first point, I think, in my opinion, what we are trying to do is when you look at the plastic problem, I think we are trying to look at how to fix the outside, but I don't think we are trying to concentrate on the inside. What I mean by that is that we are trying to look at the solutions from outside, but we are not looking at how to change the behavior of the people. So when I say inside, that is what I mean, how to change the behavior of the people to not to dispose these items so that it will have an environmental impact. So it's the community awareness. I think Sharon is very strong on this. Is very important because if you can change the behavior of people, you know, we have a major have a major progress in this area. So the other point is, again, going back to the manufacturers, and you know, this is happening in Europe now. The concept of extended producer responsibility, meaning that how we can get the manufacturers responsible physically and financially for picking up the products which they are manufactured after being used. Excuse me. So when it comes to plastics, therefore, one of the things we need to look at is this as a long-term solution, is to see how we can penalize the manufacturers who makes it difficult, who produces plastic which are difficult to recycle, and to encourage the manufacturers who produce plastics which are easy to recycle, which can gain value after that. So so the extended producer responsibility gives that opportunity to do that. And the European waste management plastic waste strategy is really you know, going in this direction. So there are the two things we can do. I know we have a lot of initiatives at this stage from various governments to ban the plastics, ban plastic bags, and ban various items. That's a very good initiative, and definitely there are some positive results coming out of that. But I think we need to do more. We need to get into the bottom of the problem and see how we can solve the problem in the long term by looking at two things. One is looking at the behavioral change, and two, looking at how we can get the manufacturers responsible for their products like what is happening in the electronic waste area, and which is happening very successfully now. So so that they are the two things which I think it is very, very important to sort out. And of course, for the Asia Pacific region, the crucial thing now is to look at how they can develop a good waste management system, and which is the important thing there is to look at the technology which is sustainable in those countries, and also the financial sustainability, because they cannot depend on donor agencies forever. So this is where the challenges they have. So that's a short presentation from me, and I'm happy to take any questions now, or I think the questions can come later on as well. I can see there's a lot of questions coming in the chat session. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sunil. I think it would be really good just to explore a little bit more with you. You know, like I know you've been doing quite a bit of work in Vietnam, and I've noticed that there's been some interesting questions that have come up. Somebody mentioned that they saw a school in Vietnam when they were having their break. The kids were playing in the playground and they were burning plastic on the fire during their playtime. You know, these sort of things that obviously happen quite a lot in developing countries. Could you just elaborate a little bit for us on what you feel, apart from the two things that you've mentioned? Is there other challenges that you feel in particular countries, in the developing countries that you are traveling in and going to see and doing your training in, that you think that there is blockages with behavioural change, and how long you think it would take for that change to come, given economic challenges, obviously now the pandemic challenge, and obviously people, you know, the environment is really on the bottom of the list, particularly in these developing countries.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the key problem we have in developing countries is that how to recover the actual cost of waste management. Because as you know, in countries like here, if you look at the developed countries, we have a formal system of recovering the cost of waste management through our rate notices and so on. So due to the economic situations, due to the capabilities and so on, it is a major challenge to recover the cost of waste management, because people still see the waste management as a free service, whereas as I mentioned, they are willing to pay for the other services. So this is going to be a major challenge, and but the bottom line is that we cannot continue this way. We need to somehow get the cost of waste management into the equation. So unless that happens, then people will keep throwing these materials into the environment, and so on. So interesting that you mentioned about the schools and the burning plastics. And this is a dilemma, because in those countries, open burning is very common, because there's no landfill facilities, proper landfill facilities. So the kids, when they see this open burning happening, this is what they're trying to do as well. But having said that, there are good programs in those countries, especially in Indonesia. During the training program, we came across a good program where the schools are getting involved and looking at solving this problem, and basically getting rewarded for those activities. So this is of course Sharon's area, but I think in waste management, teaching the kids, teaching the children is the best thing to do. Because that is children, we can mold them, whereas the older people like us are very difficult to move sometimes. So
Sunil,
yeah,
I've got one question in, and it's very aligned to this exact issue. Can you just give a view on what you think about ocean cleanups Interceptor is doing as an intervention sort of type?
Yeah, the ocean cleanup is, it's happening around the world, and it is excellent initiative, because that demonstrates to the public, this is an issue, and so we are talking about community awareness and things like that. So this is excellent. However, we cannot keep doing this. So we need to sort of look at other solutions as well, because we can't keep on cleaning up the ocean, people throwing and keeping up. We are, a group of people then clean up. So this practice cannot continue forever. So we need to have something in place to, while the ocean cleanup is happening, we need to have something in place as a longer term solution.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in there about the schools. Quite a few of you will know that Plastic Oceans here in Australia and New Zealand, we have a very extensive schools program that we run for primary and secondary schools, which we found has been gathering a huge amount of traction because of the rollout of how we do it, which is over a 12-month period, and we give them lots of time to be able to do it, to tailor make what each school requires. And I think you're absolutely right. It's about getting the youth on board as early as possible, because they're the ones that can change the village rather than the village changing them. But it's really fantastic. Thank you so much, Sunil. I have to keep moving on to our next presenter, so that we've got time still at the end to do a bit of a wrap up and solution. So if anyone has any further questions for Sunil and Jeff, obviously we'll be able to ask them later, and we'll get round to that. Thank you so much for the chat questions. They've been fantastic. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Len Humphreys. He is the scientist and an inventor. Len is the CEO and co-founder of Licella Holdings and co-inventor of Licella's breakthrough cat HTR. I know he's going to be talking to you more about that, but it's basically his chemical recycling technology. Len is also director with Licella's commercial partners IQ Renew and Mura Technology. Len is a chartered chemist, which I believe is where his science invention started, and perhaps I think one of the reasons why Len has been working so hard to save the planet the last couple of decades, because his waste to energy invention does help to assist offsetting the fact that he is a fan of large cars and big engines. So I hope I haven't dropped you in on that one. But so on that note, though, I'd like to introduce Len to speak to us about possible solutions to close the loop on both medical and emotion waste. Over to you, Len.
Thanks, Ricky. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever we all are. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, I am addicted to cars. It's a very great weakness of mine. That's why I've been trying to save the world in so many other ways. So I'm the anchor person and the token mad scientist as well. So if you look at that first slide, I mean, it sort of puts it into perspective. So 91% of all the plastics ever made in the history of plastics has never been recycled. So that's an interesting comment. I also want to go back to something that somebody said on the chat room. We keep saying waste. It's not waste, it's a resource. That's the problem. We need to change the terminology. What we need to look at this is when we pick up our package, that's a resource, and we have responsibility to try and reuse that resource. I mean, Jeff said it as well. How do we get value back from that resource that we just picked up from the shelf at the supermarket? So, you know, look at Australia alone, we consume 3.4 million tons of plastics a year. It's horrendous. Now, so we've got next slide, please, Sharon. Next slide, please, Sharon. Thank you. There's a bit of a lag, I apologize. So what are we trying to do this? Now, a lot of speakers talked about physical recycling. Physical recycling has only been aimed at 2 types of plastics. As most you know, there's seven types of plastics. And I haven't got a slide, but you can see, maybe you can't see that. There's 7 types of plastic, 1 to 7. And the ones that are actually recycled is 1 to 2, which is your PET. What's PET? That's your water bottles, like this. So PET is a plastic polyethylene terephthalate. And then it's your milk bottles that are more opaque, like these things here, the more opaque plastics, which is HDPE. So our recycling industry of plastic is only around 2 plastics. So that's physical recycling. Where the world's going now is closing the loop and bringing chemical recycling. So what is chemical recycling? Well, quite simply, it's returning the building blocks from which the materials came from. So, you know, each of these is a polymer. So what's a polymer? Polymers adding together some simple units in multiple lengths. So you're just adding it. So you're multiplying it. So what we're doing is we're unzipping that process. So chemical recycling is all about unzipping the plastic. So what we've looked at is how can we unzip all the plastics 1 to 7. So the Kcr is the approach. Next, please. Next slide, please, Sharon. So what is Kcr? So if you look at that top picture, you can see all the end-of-life materials. So we refer to things as end-of-life. So we either have a reincarnation, so we bring them back to life, or we have a recycle and we bring them back, the resource back. So too often, what I thought going back to when I first looked at chemical recycling, is that all of these end-of-life materials, you know, the end-of-life tires, the end-of-life wood, construction demolition waste, it isn't really end-of-life. It's just been laying there. It's a resource that's waiting to come back to life. So chemical recycling, what we do is we use water. So it's a bit bizarre, but we use water, this stuff inside of here, we use water as a chemical. So we actually take advantage of the properties of water, which is what the Kcr is. So what does the Kcr stand for? It's rather a big word. It stands for catalytic hydrothermal reactor. So what does that mean? Well, hydro is water, so that's normal for water. Thermal is heat. So it's got something to do with water, and it's got something to do with heat. So what we do is we use the water that helps to actually chemically unzip these end-of-life materials, plastics, but also the end-of-life biomass, or the end-of-life tires, or the end-of-life construction waste. Now today it's focused on end-of-life plastics, which is a huge problem by itself. So what we actually do is then we return this back into the system, and we make these plastics. So you've got here, one of the biggest problems is pots, tubs, and trays, because that's when you saw that supermarket shop that Jeff showed at the beginning, all those shelves when you walk through Tesco's, you walk through, you know, Coles, you walk through Woolworths, and you watch a Waitrose in the UK, that 85% of that is pots, tubs and trays, and it's films, plastic films. And at the moment, plastic films, pots, tubs and trays are not. So we only actually physically recycle, and the ability to recycle about 12% of the materials that we produce, 12%. Therefore, you know, what about the other the other 78%? Where's it gone? So next slide, please. So if you look at this is a pyramid from Europe. Where's the, and from talking about here as well, what is it about this recycling? You look at that picture at the bottom. The bottom is disposal, so we throw it away. The top is prevention. So where recycling comes is up the pyramid away from energy recovery. In Europe used to take resources, which they call waste, and they burned them. So incineration to create energy. Europe is now moving away from that. They realize that what we should do is take out all the resources that we can possibly recover, and everything that we think we can't recover economically or viably, then maybe that can go to incineration to help. But that's the last call. Unfortunately, here in Australia, incineration is coming back to the foe because all the incineration companies have been thrown out of Europe. We've got nowhere else to go. So if you hear the word incineration, please say no. Please say think about recycling. Then reuse. Well, reuse is related to recycling. You know, so we're chemically recycling. So chemically recycling, unzipping the polymers that made the plastics back to the basic ingredients and reusing them, is complements physical recycling. In fact, it does the 78% of plastics that physical cannot. Next slide, please. Now, so somebody also asked about, I think, Craig, you asked about, what about the fact that the oil price has died? Well, oil price, we talked about COVID-19. So another phenomenon of COVID-19 is that we stopped traveling in boats, trains, and planes. Therefore, you know, we stopped consuming it. So what's happened with the oil price is 90% plus an anomaly of COVID-19. And when we start getting back in the air, back in the train, back in the plane, it's going to go back up. The world consumes about over 100 million barrels of fossil oil a day. Now, during the COVID-19 shutdown, that went like that, like a stone. And you saw the aberration of oil going negative. The oil companies were paying people to take oil. That's what it meant. But even now, even though, you know, restrictions are starting to tickle up, but most of us are still working from staying at home, it's recovered back to about $32 a barrel for West Texas Intermediate. So that will come back. It will come back. So this slide is just re-emphasizing what can be physically recycled, which is just group 1, which is PET, group 2, which is HDPE. So the other 5 groups are not physically recycled. And the other 5 groups represent the majority of plastics. Unfortunately, we talked about, you know, why do plastics get in the ocean? Because a lot of you also comment in the voting system. There's the recycling facilities just aren't in existence in too many countries in Asia Pacific. And China used to take all the world's plastics. First thing, their sorting process. You ever saw this? Can somebody go on mute, please? So I can't. Sharon, can you put that on mute, please? I don't think anybody can hear me now. Okay, thank you. So. Okay, I'll come off mute. Okay, so is it possible to put the slides back up, Sharon? All right, well, I won't be Sharon to put the slides back up. You know, what we were saying there is the oil price is the COVID-19 also a victim at the moment. That will come back. Now, we're talking about how does it get into the oceans, and we're talking about China's sort. China used to take all the world's plastic resources, and their method of sorting was tipping onto a field, and they had children going amongst the waste and picking up where they could recognize a Coca-Cola bottle or a water bottle, where they could recognize a milk bottle. They were only picking up the 2 parts, part 1, part 2. The rest of it is laid on the floor. And that came China's sword, which is now forcing the world to do what it should have been doing from day one, take responsibility for its own recycling, particularly first world countries. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Now, you can see here that we participate in the circular economy, and we turn those plastics and zip it back to what we call a plastic crude. But those plastic crudes can then be distilled to the highly pure chemicals that participate in making the plastic, so we can really close the loop. Now, you see that picture on the left with the skip? That's medical waste. As somebody said, medical waste is going exponentially. Medical waste is mostly group 5 and group 6. Therefore, it's mostly polypropylene and polystyrene. And we can recycle that. You know? So medical waste is one of the targets that we're looking at in the chemical recycling. It's not waste, it's a resource. What you're seeing in that skip is a much underutilized and much underappreciated resource. And yes, we're using a lot more during this time. So hospitals are using significantly more because the frequency of them changing their personal protection equipment. And that what you see in there is also from surgeries and from, they have surgical packs. So a lot of this is surgical packs and one-use instrumentation. So that's also an important facet for us as well. Next slide, please. That is, oh, okay, thank you. That was it. All right, so there's a couple of the questions in there that I've tried to answer on the way through, which is about, it's not a waste, it's a resource. We try to make sure how do we get value. Well, chemical recycling, we chemically recycle 78% of the group 3, 4, 5, 6 that isn't today physically recycled. So it complements. So, but the first thing is education. It's not waste, it's a resource. The second thing is that recycling is good. I mean, we mentioned Kcr Renew. So Lysella is a major shareholder in Kcr Renew who manages one of the biggest MRFs. What's a MRF? It's a material recovery facility. So we don't call it a waste recovery facility, we call it material. So we're on the Central Coast and we're processing 90,000 tonne a year of curbside recyclables. 90,000 tonne a year. You know, so the technology is there, and you talk about recovering the cost, but if we can recover the cost by physical recycling, which you partially can, if we close the loop on chemical, we can recover the cost of recycling. So first, a lot of it is education. So we say to the countries that haven't got recycling industry, you can recover the cost of that recycling by chemical and physical recycling. It starts to encourage them to participate more in recycling. But a huge amount of it is what Ricky said, is education. It's getting the children being part of the resource recovery, and children love it. So education, more awareness, recycling costs can be recovered. We can do chemical and physical. The technology is there. It's now being propagated around the world. So thank you, Ricky.
Excellent. That was fantastic. Obviously, you could talk for hours, as all of our speakers can. I just wanted to ask a question on behalf of a couple of the questions that have come through the Zoom chat, which was about the challenge with biodegradables. In that, you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there about, you know, how efficient and effective is it to have something that's biodegradable or compostable, for example. What are your thoughts on that, then?
Well, you're right. There's a lot of misinterpretation. So something should be biodegradable shouldn't be an excuse to throw it in the ocean or throw it in the on the ground. Biodegradable should be designed for if it escapes into the environment accidentally. So it's because. And also the other misnomer is biodegradable. So often some of these biodegradable materials produce microplastics. They don't actually, they look like they disappear, so you can't see them, but there's microplastics. Mm. So the next thing is to find a truly biodegradable, something that actually doesn't produce microplastics. So the industry is working now on some things that are truly biodegradable. But not with the intent that they can escape to the environment. But if they do escape to the environment by accident, not by plan, then they know that they can be truly biodegradable. But the cautious thing is truly biodegradable, not just disappear and produce microplastics.
So what's the biggest challenge that you're facing at the moment? Your key challenges for recycling, and also you know, it'd be good if you could touch on the differences for you between the ocean plastic waste and medical waste, which I think is really interesting, because there was that question asked earlier on about the oil prices going down, etc. So recycling is going to become less profitable. You know, the price is dropping. So I think it'd be really interesting. There's sort of three questions combined in that, but I think it'd be really good to unpack that.
Well, there's two things we've seen. I mean, we with our partner Miro, which is focused on end-of-life plastics, with us on a global basis. Now, we have huge interest from oil companies, and even now, when the oil price is at all-time low, and I repeat, I think that's a COVID-19 phenomenon that will come back. But even now, the oil companies we've been talking to, and Jeff's aware of some of those as well, are still, they've cut back a huge amount in their other investments and infrastructure, but they've actually kept the projects that we're discussing with them alive. Why is that? It's because of all of you. It's because they now see that they have a social responsibility to participate in chemical recycling. Because you're a shareholder, because you're a lobbyist, because you write into them, because their executives are held responsible to making sure that they have an increasing amount of material in their product range that comes from recycled sources, they are participating. They're participating because of the pressure from the people like are on this call today. So thank you. Come off mute, Ricky.
There's been a lot of questions around energy and just the cost in terms of the processing. Can you comment on that at all?
Sorry, repeat the question, please, Sharon.
So there's been questions around the energy consumption to actually create that, also the end product. So if you could just give us a bit of an insight.
Well, I can, you know, to mean physical or chemical recycling. All I can comment is on chemical recycling, but we have a closed loop. So when we unzip the plastics, part of what we produce is a high calorific value gas, and we use that gas to drive the energy of the process. Secondly, because of modern heat exchangers, modern energy recovery, we don't have much of parasitic use, so we don't consume. You know, the energy balance of the process is quite closed. So via modern heat recovery and modern heat exchangers, and by using some of the product from the unzipping of the plastic, the net consumption is quite low. In fact, it's probably lower than physical recycling.
So moving forward, looking at solutions and what we can do, big picture, obviously, No Time to Waste series, the whole purpose was to really see if we can get some traction and get some things happening, particularly with the medical waste, clinical waste, contamination. Do you have any plans or any thoughts at the moment on what you can do with what you're doing with your MRF, and if you're able to look at running any trials and things like that with medical waste?
Well, we've just finished the largest chemical recycling of end-of-life plastics, probably in the Southern Hemisphere a few weeks ago. Medical waste to us, you know, the only thing you got to make sure is there's no bacterial no contamination. But most of that material is pretty safe, or else they wouldn't put it outside in the skip. So the non-contaminated in terms of potential microbes, we have material today at Somersby, and we intend to look at trying to get the opportunity. And we're working with you, Ricky, and working with this community to see if we can then help try to fund a trial in an not too distant future. So we've got the material. We're working with a couple of base hospitals on the Central Coast. That's where those skips you saw from. And when you see the volume that these hospitals, even a small base hospital, puts out, it's incredible, incredible. So yes, we've identified the source and are looking for the opportunity and some of the finances to complete that trial.
Mm. And I guess it's a good opportunity for me to mention to everybody that we've, you know, that we are exploring that possibility with you and looking at what we can do to help you with that trial. So we're obviously putting it out there that, you know, Plastic Oceans is available to help over the coming months to see what we can do to help you with your trials. And if anybody wants to obviously donate to support that trial for you, they can contact obviously Plastic Oceans at a later date, because we'd obviously really like to see, you know, what you can do and where that can go. And I know there's a few out there that are trying to do the same thing. And regardless of the pandemic, there's always clinical waste, there's always medical waste. It's something that really needs to be addressed much sooner than later. This has just driven it much further to the surface because of what's happening with the millions more tons of PPE that's out there. I think I've got a question here that's from somebody that says, what can the consumer do to help Licella for you, Len? That's from Leon.
Well, I think that the best thing to do is to encourage your local member, your local both council, you know, provincial, local member that they should be putting chemical or recycling to the top of their agenda. I mean, it's getting the airplay. Now, to be fair, Licella is a love child of the government, so we can't, you know, we've had a lot of support from the federal government to help us get where we are. Neither are we an overnight success. It took us 12 years to become an overnight success, but we now have got world recognition. But we are an Australian technology, even though my accent might give me away that I originate from the UK. I carry an Aussie passport and I'm proud of it. So it is an Australian technology. What you can do is keep what you're doing. It's just making awareness. It's making sure that you have an opportunity to talk to your local member, council, state member, federal member, wherever you are, and make sure that's to their agenda. But I think that's changed. I think one of the byproducts of COVID-19, which we talked about, the effect on fossil oil, is that it's made the whole world more conscious of taking care of itself. You know, so every cloud is a silver lining. I think that the world is now more conscious. Don't forget, you know, this is the first time in human history that the planet has moved as one. You know, so it's terrible what we're going through. It's bad. It's a tragedy. But it's the first time in human history that we've moved as one. And I think we'll come out of this different. I think we're going to be more conscious now about the planet, about care, about the future, about making sure that we have a legacy for our children and grandchildren.
Thanks, Len. There's actually been a few questions that have come up while you've been talking about the cost of the crude, the cost of what you're doing, and you know, what does that actually mean? And I think it would be really good if you could address the actual hard cost. There was a question much earlier on about Andrew Forrest, and I actually went to a presentation that he gave last year in December in Melbourne, talking about, you know, his program and what his philosophy is with the value add and revaluing the value of plastic so that it's got a much higher value, like we had for glass and for paper. And, you know, we have a high value for those items, and to give plastic the same value to make it a much higher commodity so people aren't going to do that throwaway. Could you comment on that, Len, please, before I move then to open it up to all three speakers?
I realised that I was hoping you were all lip readers. I apologise. So, sorry, Ricky, could you repeat the question? What the question is about?
So the question, there was quite a few questions that have just come up about cost per litre, about the price for the cost, you know, yeah, the cost of production for plastic crude.
There's a famous, so the cost of, so the famous question is it depends, or the famous answer is it depends where you are, you know. So you can go from some extremes in certain countries where you have to potentially pay for certain feedstocks, you know, and in New South Wales, it's a matter of landfill avoidance, so people pay you to take it. So it depends where you are, because the cost of the feedstock dictates the production cost. In any chemical process, what Kcr is chemical recycling. So any chemical process, you know, the feedstock is probably 60% of the cost of production. And the cost of feedstock, you know, New South Wales, you know, we have what is it, $160 per ton landfill. So so in New South Wales, you can get paid. So, you know, for the production, if you're getting paid, then you almost have a negative cost of product, the final product. So in the UK, around Europe as well. So plus, you know, so it's difficult to say what the production cost is. Production cost is significantly governed by the feedstock cost. So it depends where you are in the world. You know, because a lot of people that work within, like Australia, look at landfill avoidance. So they will often incentivize you, so they'll pay you to take the feedstock. Now here, there's no incentive for the final product. Now you go to Europe, where they'll pay you to take the material for avoidance of landfill, but they'll also pay you incentives for the product that you make. So it depends where you are. And in terms of production costs in pure energy, then what we just said is most of the energy is captured by heat exchangers, or we generate the energy required for the process. Because Kcr is a very low energy consumption. You talk about incineration. Sorry, I apologize. We talk about this thing called pyrolysis, pyrolyzing plastics. Well, that's at about 700, 600 degrees C. We're down to the 400s, 380s. So the energy of our process is significantly less. So, you know, our carbon intensity compared to other processes is significantly less as well. So, you know, but it's difficult to answer what's the cost of production, because a lot of the energy we recycle, or we close loop it, and the cost of the raw material, at times we're paid for that raw material. And in terms of incentivizes for the end product, it depends where you are in the world. There's nothing in Australia. In Europe, the product, this plastic crude product from unzipping plastics, is likely to come under the renewable energy directive too. And that means there's a big incentive to produce that product. So you don't have to get paid for your starting material or paid to take it, because you're getting a huge incentive. It's forcing the oil companies to have an increasing amount of this type of product in their mix. And if they don't, they pay a big penalty. So maybe that's not the answer that somebody wanted, because it depends is the answer.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a tough one. I know, especially with the changing prices with oil at the moment on the marketplace. So I think what we'll do, we've only got about 4 minutes left, and I'd like to just bring it back to if anybody has any specific questions they'd like to ask any of our speakers. If you'd like to let us know, so we can direct that to the speakers in particular, because obviously each one of them comes from a different knowledge base, and they're experts in different areas. So it would be really, we want to give you that opportunity. I think that there is a lot out there. There's obviously a lot of discussion. There's a lot more talking that needs to be done. But the most important thing is that we want you to be able to come away with something from each of the No Time to Waste series. So what you'd like to hear next time, we've got two very definite feeds that we're looking at that will come through, and we haven't, the date for that, it'll be sort of pretty much watch this space. We're going to be doing something in about another month. But we you know, really value your feedback and your input. I don't know if there's any questions. I'm just looking while I'm talking to you to see if there's any other questions anybody wants to ask any of our speakers.
And feel free to come.
I'll keep chatting.
I was going to say, feel free to answer, literally ask your questions offline as well, and our team will help to actually feed that through. Yeah. So for people who watch this recording online, when it's finally put up on the web, please don't hesitate to reach out to Ricky or I, and we can pass questions forward to the speaker panel today. So from our perspective, thank you very much for coming along and joining us. And if you have a direct question, please ask. There is one in terms of Licella plant. Is it independent from infrastructure power? Was a question.
Yeah, it can be. So what happens? So one of the questions, you know, because if you're just looking at, you know, more and more of people working with one thing called naphtha, which is quite a light fraction. We want that naphtha because that's the feedstock to go back to polyethylene. So when we're looking at naphtha, we produce enough gas that we can not just fire the boilers that we need to heat the water up, but we can also have gas left over that we can feed into a genset, gas genset. So, you know, if we're looking at naphtha, we can be isolated from the grid. Yes.
Great. So Jeff and Sunil, did you have anything that you'd actually like to ask each other with the conversation that we've had with the three of you? Because there might have been things that have come up in this conversation that you'd like to comment on as well before we say goodbye to everyone.
If possible, I'd like to pick up just on the costs that Len was talking about at the end. And there's a couple of things I want to say. First of all is that the UK Plastics Pact has now, I use the word for my fisheries day, spawned an Australasian, New Zealand similar group. And I think the conversation on costs and incentives and measures, the kind of Sunil was talking about, is going to be a big conversation in Australasia. I think that's really interesting because there's various taxation measures being discussed around the UK, for example, £200 per tonne for packaging that it does not contain less than 30% recycled content. And the process that Lysella and Len has just talked about will be an important deliverer of recycled polymer back to the manufacturing industry. So I think that's going to create a pull for plastics manufacturers to go for that recycled polymer as a base for their products. But I think one thing we haven't talked about here, Len touched on it, things like avoiding going to landfill, avoiding landfill tax and things like that, which has been a thing in Europe as well, is what's the cost of the planet? And I think somebody made a brilliant point about, in 5 years' time, that cost of avoidance, of putting stuff in the environment, it will mushroom. And I think when we look at the whole cost of this in our circular economy, we've really got to factor in what is the cost avoided of not having this material going out into the environment. And governments need to own that, and it needs to be done on an international scale. So I'm looking at how Plastics Pact can foment that conversation globally about how is it we hold people to account. So could it be stewardship schemes? So farmers buy plastics to go around their silage wrap, for example, but they're paying a levy so it can be collected and then sent for reprocessing rather than being left on farms. And I'm afraid in the UK, farmers are burning it because they just can't get rid of the material. It's not economic for them to deal with it. So let's build the cost in up front, and let's make sure that then helps to drive the system going forward. But the Sunil's point about governance is absolutely brilliant, and I think it's really important we think about who's accounting for the costs of impact on the environment, how we build that into the system so that the Lysella process and mechanical recycling has a chance to function in a low oil price world. I hope, Len, you're right, the oil does go up for a variety of reasons, but nonetheless, price goes up. But at the moment, it's making waste recycling more challenging. So yeah, I was going to hand that to Sunil about how we avoid how we account for the environmental cost of this, because I think that's really part of that equation. So I don't know if Sunil heard that, but
yeah, Sunil, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think I fully agree with Jeff. So I think we are all agreeing to that. It is a very important point. I think what we have to do is how to move forward here is to look at short-term as well as long-term solutions. We tend to concentrate too much on the short-term solutions. I think we need to put more emphasis on the long-term solutions as well, because we need both of them. But unfortunately, there's a bit of an imbalance at the moment in the policy arena. But certainly, Jeff summarized very important points there. Yeah, that's very good.
Mm. Well, thank you. Look, I really appreciate all our speakers coming on, and obviously the time differences as well. So thank you in particular, Jeff, for getting up so incredibly early to do this with us. And Sunil, I know you're interstate, and so is Len, and I'm here in Melbourne, so everyone's from all over. We're going to wrap up because we've already just gone over time a couple of minutes. We are, as I said, this is going to be going out as recording and on podcast, so anybody who has registered, or if they couldn't get on, they will receive the recording, and we'll be posting it on our social channels as well. I just also wanted to mention that in the Plastic Oceans Australasia world, we're actually coming up to World Oceans Day, which is a really big day in the calendar for many of us. So we've got some big things happening, joint ventures with Plastic Oceans UK and the British High Commission in Malaysia. So there's a whole series of things that are happening. In fact, Jeff, if you want to quickly just talk on that, that would be great, because you've been there's so many events that we've got going on there, and podcasts and webinars. It'd be great to get you to quickly put the plug in on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so I'll try not to do any spoilers at this point, but just to point to people that early in June and before World Environment Day, which is the 5th of June, and obviously World Oceans Day, there's going to be a campaign that's been led by British High Commission in Malaysia, and it's going to be talking about the whole of the ASEAN region, focusing really on the marine environment, the marine hope spots that are being created globally as well, and to highlight really how we can work together to get the right solutions in place. And there'll be a thematic set of days focusing on the ocean, focusing on the hope spots, focusing on the solutions, and how science and technology that Len spoke to earlier on as well is going to come to the fore to try and help us. We can't rely on just on science and technology, but the idea really is to us to value the ocean and inspire action from governments, from people, from business to do the right thing. So watch out for that. It will be on a lot of channels. Plastic Oceans Australasia, clearly Plastic Oceans UK will be putting out tweets, and there'll be some hashtags to follow as well. And it will run for about 3 to 5 days in terms of active webinars. It's a whole series of webinars being done, so both on from a governmental point of view, but also process technology and so on, and science. So some really interesting stuff. So yes, I know we're doing a lot of Zooms right now, and I'm sure everybody's doing at least a couple a day, but the effort that's been put in to make this a success, I think it should, well worth your time looking at some of those webinars from the 8th onwards. But the campaign will start earlier into June. So, but thank you for bringing that up, Ricky. Appreciate that.
No problem. And also, just to let everybody know, we are doing quite a lot of work here nationally with Australia and New Zealand with schools programs for competitions with our schools now that a lot of them are back, called Turn the Tide. So there's a lot of information on our website if you're interested more in our schools, councils and business programs. And we really welcome your questions and look forward to meeting up with you again. I just want to end on a little quote from David Attenborough, who of course is well known to us all, and he's done many quotes over the years. But I read one just recently where he said, "I really wish we had a planet that was double the size and half of it had not yet been discovered or explored." And I thought that was very poignant, because our world is getting smaller and smaller and our resources are less and less, and there's many more of us. And I thought that was a very poignant one. And he's just had his 94th birthday, so he's a big supporter of everything that we're all trying to do. So thank you, everyone. I think we'll sign off and look forward to meeting up with you again. Thanks again to our speakers. Thank you, Sharon. Thanks to Griffith University and to everybody else that's come on board. Look forward to talking to you in the near future. Bye-bye.